So, the Confucian thinking goes in two directions, or Neo-Confucian thinking goes in two directions, which is underlying inside of everything being made of chi or material force. One is a kind of cosmological direction, and one is more sort of practical political application. So I'll deal with the sort of more cosmological one first. So if everything is made of chi or material force, according to a certain principle or Li, what is driving all that? What is the mechanism for all that? And the answer to that is something called the supreme ultimate. This is where it's going to get kind of technical. So I'm not sure I completely understand this. Japanese, Korean, and Chinese scholars for centuries have been looking at this diagram and these concepts. So we should take a shot at it too. But it's actually a nice way of showing how syncretic Neo-Confucianism is, because there are ideas here that come from Taoism, there are ideas that come in the idea of the emptiness or the void that come out of Buddhism. There's a kind of native cosmology, Chinese cosmology of yin and yang, which is independent really of any of the other thought systems that pops up in them. It also pops up in Neo-Confucianism. So it kind of all gets mashed together in this sort of diagram. So the idea is that there is, at the beginning of the universe, nothing at all, void. And even to say that it's nothing is give it a label, which you shouldn't be doing. So the minute it's given a label, then it becomes something, or a unity or one. And this is what the Lao talks about here, right? Tao is perfect unity. So the Tao is pre-language, pre-existence, it's neither existence or non-existence. The minute it's talked about as non-existence, it gives rise to something. And then the idea of having something and having not something, already you have the concept of two, so that gives rise to two, one gives rise to two. The minute you have two, you have all of this, or a mixture of this, so you can have now three elements. And then from there on, it goes out. Once you have three, you can keep on going and going. Now, here you get to this idea of the supreme polarity of Tai Chi. This is also what's used, the character that are used in Tai Chi, the martial art, which is supposed to be based on the balance of softness and strength in the concept. So, Tai Chi is the sort of engine behind the universe in terms of everything comes out of this constant sort of transforming, shifting balance between yang and yin, or complete present and complete absence. And there has to be some sort of logic to the way this transformation takes place, and that's where the wuxing or the five phases come in. And this is the logic of how material force takes form as actual objects in the universe. It's through this balance of the five phases, water, wood, fire, earth, metal. And they're put here in their order of engendering each other, but there's also an order of destroying one another as well, like I talked about before. So you can see these elements that we talked about previously in the Han Dynasty and even in Grecian thought being drawn upon in Neo-Confucian thought, along with passages from Taoist texts and Buddhist ideas going there as well. Until you get this sort of idea of the one who is 10,000 things. So from this idea of the void to all 10,000 things of existence, at the center of that is this idea of supreme polarity, which is the mechanism by which the void gives birth to things in their various forms. Do you understand that now? I don't know if I put Tai Chi on the test, I don't know what people would say. I mentioned Buddhism a few times. It's not as obvious here. By the way, this diagram was popularized by Zhu Xi, but he adapted it from an earlier Neo-Confucian thinker with Zhou Wenyi. Where, I guess the Buddhist ideas might be the idea of the void being the ultimate sort of nature of all reality. But Buddhism also had a profound influence on Neo-Confucianism in its very form, not in terms of its ideas, but its actual practice. So Neo-Confucian academies were built along the same lines as Buddhist temples. In fact, they sometimes resembled Buddhist temples. Buddhist schools often had an idea of patriarchs, sort of masters that passed down their teachings from master the disciples and then become a new patriarch. And the Neo-Confucians developed this idea of a lineage of thought. So Jushi, of course, is one of the major patriarchs. And so different academies have their lines of transmission of Neo-Confucian thought. Even there's a sense of a Neo-Confucian practice of sitting in silence and thinking, which is very similar to meditation and Buddhist tradition. So this kind of form of how Neo-Confucianism, this practice, was influenced heavily by Buddhism. But the Neo-Confucians always denied the legitimacy of Buddhism. And their major sort of criticism of Buddhism was that it was a selfish thought system because it was based on personal salvation, personal detachment, removing yourself from family and society, and seeking your own enlightenment. And of course, the primary tenets of Confucianism is responsibility towards others, and responsibility of the individual to society. So they, Neo-Confucians tried to sort of reconcile this new emphasis of cosmology on the sort of core Confucian value of being engaged with society, right? By the text, The Great Learning, which we've looked at before. But I'll look at it here now with you again, giving it a sort of Neo-Confucian bent. You might, I don't know if I mentioned it before or not, The Great Learning talks about this process, right? Starting from the investigation of things within your mind, extending your knowledge, making work, rectifying your mind. At that point, though, it transfers to cultivating oneself, which you could argue is the sort of border between the interior and the exterior, right? All of this is a sort of kind of psychological, mental, consciousness type of exercise. Then cultivating oneself includes the idea of rectifying your mind and studying and making your ideas correct, but also your behavior, your appearance, your dress, your behavior towards others, how you carry yourself. It's part of cultivating oneself too, so there's an exterior component to that. And then it becomes part of integrating yourself into society with others, first your household, and then the household being a member of the state, and the state being a member of the entire world. So this is a kind of circle which is a total vision of the individual from the point of view of his or her very thought process to harmony in the entire world. And you can kind of draw this line here between the interior and exterior. The traditional Confucian text dwells more on these exterior kind of duties of your role in the family, and being filial and so forth, the loyalty that a minister is supposed to show to the ruler in terms of governing the state. Where the Neo-Confucian text seems to dwell more on the sort of interior world of the mind and psychology, but they link it to the larger picture of cosmology. And so there's a sort of new emphasis on this, which I think comes out of Buddhism as well. Buddhism, at its heart, Buddhism before it's religion, Buddhism is a form of psychology, a form of analysis of how consciousness works. And I think the Neo-Confucians were learning from that as well in their discussion of the interior of life. And so they emphasize cultivation of yourself as that key sort of transition between your interior world, your mind, and then your duty towards your family and your society at large. The sort of key point of connecting one's interior nature, which is born out of the cosmos and patterned by the cosmos, with one's external duty to upholding social order. I should not overstate the importance of Neo-Confucianism, though, in Seoul or later Chinese race Asian history. Taoism continued to be important, and Buddhism continued to be important as well, both within China and outside of China, at all levels of society, from the elite rulers to the humble villager. In fact, Neo-Confucianism was largely a sort of belief system practiced among the educated elite, and not so much the sort of average person in the street, who would more likely be going to a Taoist or Buddhist temple. Luckily, as I mentioned in the Song Dynasty, we have a whole bunch of records, not only visual records, but textual records, because of the invention or the proliferation of the printing press. And so we have access to records about daily life, which we did not have before. And there was a craze for collecting all sorts of stories. writing, sort of loosely structured essays, like we saw with Sean before, the scientists before, getting glimpses of things that normally didn't enter the discourse, official discourse of the field. And one very famous collection is called the EAS103, or the record of the listeners, the English translation I think that's used in your textbook, compiled by Songdani scholar official named Mark, who collected hundreds of stories mostly about ghost stories or sort of supernatural happenings. He supposedly would pay people to bring him stories and he'd write them down. Who knows how many stories are true or not, but they do give us a nice view into daily practice and beliefs, popular beliefs rather than beliefs of the elite. So, for example, I won't read this whole story here, obviously it's quite long, but I've given it to you, dealing with levels of society, including sedan bearers and so forth, that normally wouldn't be considered the official account. And there's an encounter with this demon that they have, and one of the traveling parties uses a Guanyin Dabeizhou, it's a Buddhist text, to ward off the demon by repeatedly repeating it over and over again, until the demon leaves. Showing this idea of Buddhism being used as part of sort of popular, ritual, popular religious practice. At this point, I was supposed to switch to Japan, said it correctly that time. But I was going to have enough time to get started and I'm going to have to stop. So what I'll do is, I do have some extra time now, since I'm ending early. So some people have some questions about their essay. If you want to come talk to me, I'll stay for about 15 minutes. The rest of you can come pick up your tests here. They're arranged alphabetically, so please make sure you're looking in the right pile.
好多人你会在意哪个？
太长了，这些。最高分多少分？
不知道。
我觉得应该有吧，他改了，再改了应该是拿了。我那essay里面写了300字，我都不知道。
要找一个 Xbox 手柄。
因为它第二是那有一个特价，我是从7美金买的，20来块，确实很便宜。
怎么样，手柄？
无线的。
然后我有手柄，我现在打那个 Battlefield，拿手柄打就是有点郁闷。然后它现在有几个解决方法，一个是往上加一个这种帽，把那个摇杆稍微再延长一截，这样的话你就有更多的精确控制的空间。然后再一个就是这个很牛逼，这个那个 trackball， 它就是一个球，然后你那个就球形的那种，它瞄准的那块就是一个球，然后你拿那个玩的时候，你瞄准的时候，如果用那摇杆瞄的话，你就得慢慢挪过去，这样挪回来，这样就很不稳。然后这个球它就能定在那儿嘛，然后就很爽。但是它这个它是卖的，它自己 modify 然后卖的。然后
不是那个 Xbox 本身产的，
不是Xbox 本身产的，这个要本身产是很牛逼。它实际上就是那个加个 laser 加个 sensor，然后你那个球的 move， 然后它 detect， 然后你那个给它换成 analog signal， 放到你本身摇杆它是往左摇，它就是往左它 detect 一个 acceleration。然后这个太那个就是怎么下去呢？我操，还是拿了一手还挺艰难的。在前面已经3级了。喂，老王，我看着你，帮我拿一下呗。